on our YouTube page. So this is the offer to purchase. What we're looking at here is that you're going to have it's the form 2T. Now, if you're looking for the form numbers, they're always going to be down on the bottom right-hand corner. And sometimes you'll hear that referred to as this, is that, hey, you need to fill out the 2T, or you need to fill out, I'm trying to remember some of the other numbers right now. Like a 12T is a land form. Sometimes people throw form numbers at you and they will work. The other part that goes with it, I don't have a copy here, but you do, is that every form has a G form with it. Now that G form, it's going to correspond to the same number. In this case here, it says 2G at the bottom, and the G stands for guideline. So that is, it actually tells you right there how to fill out the form. So as you go through it, if you're having questions, and you're like, oh, I don't know what quite to do, go to the G form, because it will tell you what to do. I think the first one there, as an example, if you look at our 2T form, at the top it asks for the sellers and the buyers, right? If you go look at 2G, it tells you do not put Mr. and Mrs. in there. So it gives you specific, specific things to do as you go through and fill this out. So always grab the 2T or grab the T form, whatever you're using, and then grab the G form if you want to. As a matter of fact, the NCAR, North Carolina Association of Realtors, that's where you can get all these forms at. And I would actually go and probably print off all of the G forms in particular and put them in a binder. And then that way, whenever you need them, and then put a little tab there. And then early on here, as you're going through things, and even, I'll be honest with you, even after like 3 or 4 years of doing real estate, there's always something that comes up. It's like, I'm not quite for sure. And you can always address that G form as a guideline. The second thing is that if you can't get a hold of me or somebody else in the market center to help you fill something out, the NCAR has a hotline, like a lawyer hotline. Call them. They'll help you answer questions as well. That's what you pay your dues for. And lastly, don't be afraid to call the North Carolina Commission. They've got lawyers there as well. They don't keep track of why you're calling. They're there to help you and to keep you out of trouble, is what it comes down to. They don't want you to get into trouble. So if you've got a question and you don't know quite what to do, again, the hotline number, the support number is on the ncreg.gov, I believe it is. So just go there and give them a holler. And one of my old BICs was the first one to teach me that. And I tell you what, it's invaluable, because they can usually get back to you faster than what a BIC can. And they'll answer your question right away. And they answer in an impartial way as well, because they're all lawyers. So they'll answer them the correct and the proper way. So again, with the offer to purchase here, as you can see with page 1 on the 2T, is that you're gonna need the seller and buyer's names in there. And as we mentioned, don't put Mr. and Mrs. The other thing I'm going to tell you also as you go through this is that you always fill out every blank. Now, whether you put a 0 in there because it's a monetary value, or N/A, which stands for non-applicable, always fill them out, because there's some unscrupulous people out there. And if you don't put something in there, they may put something in. So always fill it out. Okay. As you can see there's a question there on the first page there. The property will not include a manufactured mobile home. Pretty simple. Check the box, move on with it. Then they have the street address there. Then you get down into the bottom part there, and they're looking for like the plot or the block, the subdivision, condominium. And as you can see, there's a plat book slide at page, whatever, or the pin pad number. As you get, as you go into the information, if you're on like MLS and you go into the CRS data, a lot of times that stuff is there, and you can actually click a link, which will actually take you right to the website of the county that this stuff is in, and you can get all that information right there. Now, you don't need to fill it all out. Fill out as much as you can. But the idea here is that you want to make sure that the attorney can basically cross-reference things to make sure that we got the right stuff right. Does that make sense? I don't know if you ever heard of like down in Florida where they sold the wrong place. Yeah, they completely messed up, and they actually sold like the next door neighbor's house. And that's because they didn't follow like some of this stuff. Because if you have like the address and you have like the PIN number or like the plat in the book, they're going to go and look at it and go, all right, this is supposed to be 1005 Vandora. Oh, wait a second, this is 1007. Something's not matching here. And so now somebody's going to go and look and dig into it further, or there's going to be a phone call, obviously.
So on the invoice, called the CRS data. it
Correct.
should have all of it.
Yeah, there's the little yellow boxes kind of up top. I think there's like 3 yellow boxes there. You can click into there and you can usually get into the different counties, or you have to go to the county. Everybody has the same thing. You can search by address, or you can search by last name, or you can search by something that'll pull you into more detail on that property. I think there's like what they call it, I something in Wake County. Everybody's got some have GIS. Everybody's got something that's a little bit different, but it all has the same information. Some are a little infuriating, to be honest with you, when you're trying to pull up the information because they're really particular. But if you play around with it long enough, you can always pull it up. The other thing is too, is if you're on the listing side, you're pulling the deed anyway to make sure that their names are on the property. So you'll have that information, and then you'll have that here already, kind of moving forward. All right. Because it says there, like, some or all the property may be described in deed book. So there's the deed and the page number is there. The other thing is too, is that if you don't really want to do some of this stuff, that's where you hire a transaction coordinator and have them pull this stuff for you. You know, for me, it was worth it because I didn't have the patience to do some of this stuff, but some people really like doing it. You know, they'll sit down and they can dig in and they can find a lot of stuff. Obviously, then on page 1 there, the first thing there is purchase price. That's pretty simple. Whatever the price of the home is, the total price that you're paying, that's what you put on page 1 in that US, and it goes in US dollars there. Due diligence, remember, due diligence, it isn't something that you have to have on here. That's a negotiated item, right? So it may be 0. If it is 0, put 0. Most of the time you're going to pay some due diligence. And so what due diligence is, if you remember, is the ability for the buyer to go in and do all of their inspections, to look at the property, to send out professionals, if you want to call it that, to go in and check it. It's really the buyer paying the seller to give them time to basically do their due diligence, if you think of the legal term of that, and that's for them to check out the property. It also, in the state of North Carolina, during due diligence, you can cancel for any reason and walk away, and then if there's earnest money that's put down, you get your earnest money back. But that's the only way to get that. What's that?
The due diligence done.
The only way you can get your due diligence back is if the seller misrepresented, if there was like material facts that were obviously, there's basically a big lie. If the sell side lied, you have the opportunity possibly to get it back. But then you're going to have to prove, that there was, and some of them are easy to prove and some of them aren't. Let's say if there's a leak in the roof, if I haven't been up on the roof, how do I know it's been leaking? But that could be but if there's like a big stain on the ceiling and we say, oh, it's been fixed, or we check on the residential property disclosure that there's no issue with the roof, and of course now the ceiling falls in, then there might be an issue there where they could get their money back. It's happened, but it's not. That's why I always tell my buyers, it was like, once you give this money, it's gone. They're taking it, they're going to the beach and they're having a good time with it. So, and again, due diligence can be used as a negotiating tool, because the more you put down, the less likely it looks like you're going to walk away. Because if I'm putting down $5,000 in due diligence, it's going to take a lot for me to walk away from that house. Or if I'm putting down $250, who cares, right?
What's the going due diligence?
The way to do this is that I call it a rule of thumb. And so as an example, if the house was, $200,000, it was usually like 1 or 2%. At 2% at the most, but most of the time like 1%. So that would have been a total of like $2,000 that's going into earnest money. What I say with that is, okay, I got $2,000. How much of that do you want to put in due diligence, and how much do you want to put in earnest money? So, all right, I'm going to put $500 in due diligence and $1,500 in earnest money. If I'm on the buy side, I want to put down as little due diligence as I can. If I'm on the sell side, I want to get as much as I can.
So it's dropped drastically.
It has dropped drastically, yeah. And that's kind of back to the normal. That rule of thumb is back to the normal. Now, again, if you're in a multiple bid, or you know what, your buyer's like, no, this is the house, I want it, and I don't want to lose it. I don't want to take the chance of losing it. All right, well, then let's offer, you know, $1,500 in due diligence and $500 in earnest money, or $2,000 in due diligence and $2,000 in earnest money. The thing to make sure you tell the buyer is this, is that whatever money you put down, that comes off your purchase price. And that shows you that at the bottom there is like what the balance is. So if you're putting any money down, it will count against what they're borrowing against. So if they were going to have a 20% down, let's say had an 80-20 loan, and again, let's use the $200,000 as an example, it's $40,000 down. There's no reason why they shouldn't put all $40,000 in here someplace. If they're going to buy that house, they could put $5,000 in due diligence and $35,000 in earnest money. That's basically telling that seller that I'm buying this home. All right, there's some arguments that people would say that if that's the case, if you know what the LTV is going to be, that they should be putting that much down. But it doesn't happen. But they can, I would advise this buyer, if there was multiple bid, go ahead, put the money down. You're going to use it anyway.
The 2% between the due diligence and the earnest.
Yep.
Okay.
And as you can see there, you got to check, you know, which one it's going to be. Are they going to pay by cash, personal check, official bank check, a wire transfer? Now, of course, they got electronic transfer, which could be Venmo or Zelle or something along those lines. That's what they added in there. Now, remember that usually due diligence is supposed to be due when the contract comes in. Most of us will get it to them the next day. So you don't want to have due diligence go later than the next day. The payment of due diligence, it really gets kind of confusing, is that the payment of due diligence or non-payment of due diligence doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't executed the contract, and yet it's still part of the contract. And so it does have to be delivered at some point in time. And I believe if we go into the can't remember what page it's on here, but it does talk about due diligence, and I think after a day, and then the seller has to say, hey, get me my due diligence, or else. And then if you don't get them the due diligence, then they can cancel the contract. All right, you still have to execute is what I should say, but you don't have to execute like right now. Okay. So then you got initial earnest money. So that's what the money we're going to put up front here, and that's made payable again to the escrow agent, which is the attorney. We do not hold any escrow money here, so pay it directly to them. And as you can see there, it's cash, personal check, official bank check, wire transfer, again, electronics transfer. And there it says you got 5 days of the effective date of this contract. So if we sign the contract today, I'd have 5 days from today, which is what today is, the 18th, right? So I got until the 23rd. But usually you're taking one check, just take them both and be done with it, right? So now there's additional earnest money. So that's to be made payable and deliverable to escrow agent no later than 5 p.m. on, and this is usually the end of due diligence. Due diligence is probably going to be 21 days. That's kind of the average type of a thing, but let's just say we put down 30 days of due diligence, and we're going to do additional earnest money. So that way this money doesn't come into play until we've done all of our due diligence and we've done our inspections, and we're like, yep, we're going to go through with this. And so on the 18th of February, we'd have to deliver a check for whatever amount that is. Now there's, you know, back and forth with that. Some people, they like doing additional earnest money. I never did, because I'll be honest, I was lazy, right? I just wanted to get that, like I said, I want to take both checks and I wanted to be done. This probably protects your buyer a little bit more though, because of course, then your money's not being held by somebody else, and you're not putting your money up until you say, yep, I'm going to buy this house. It gives you a little more additional time. Dependent upon the market you're in, like additional earnest money for like the last, well, from about June of last year and up until like, July of 2020, nobody was doing it, because I'm not taking additional earnest money if I'm a seller. You're putting your money up front, and usually at that point in time, as we got more into it, it was all in due diligence, and there was no earnest money offered.
Crazy.
It was crazy. And again, as you can see, time being the essence, and again, you check off whichever one you're going to use, whether it's a cash, official bank check, wire transfer, electronic transfer. And then you can see there's by assumption of the unpaid principal balance. I haven't made an assumption since I've been in this. And it's more, that's usually more on a VA loan is where that's gonna be. Same thing with seller financing. Now you can see there, the next line there is some building deposit. So if you're working with like a new construction, usually small builders, they'll just use this form here because most builders, bigger builders like Lennar, KB Home, they have their own forms. But if somebody, and there's actually a new construction form that's out there. And so that's something to ask that small builder when they say, hey, how do you want to handle the contract? Do you have one or do you want me to write it up? And they'll say, you just write it up. The next question you should ask is, you want me to use the standard form 2T or do you want me to use the new construction one?
Okay.
And depending upon how far, I think part of that is how far the construction has gone. Because I think there's some things in the other new construction one that talks about the type of installation that's going in, things along those lines. This one here is probably for a completed house. It's already done, ready to sell. And then at the bottom there, as you can see there, the balance of the purchase price and the cash settlement. So whatever that purchase price was 200,000. And we put down 2,500 in due diligence and we put down 2,500 in earnest money. So our balance is going to be 195 would be 195 goes there. And again, if you're not using any of those blanks, put a 0 in there or an NA. Because you can see how people could stick something in there, right? At the bottom, you're going to see there's buyer's initials and seller's initials. It's highly recommended that they initial them because what that states is they have read this page.
Right.
But it's not going to void a contract if they didn't sign them. Okay. So on page 2, you start getting into, some more definitions. If the parties agree that the buyer will pay any fee or deposit described above by electronic or wire transfer, seller agrees to cooperate in effecting such transfer, including the establishment of any necessary account and providing any necessary information to buyer. Provided, however, buyer shall be responsible for costs of any associated with the transfer. So if there's a wire transfer, they're usually $25. There's a cost to it. So basically what it's saying there is the seller is going to provide their account number and the routing number. The buyer is going to transfer that money and the buyer is responsible for the $25. The seller doesn't have to pay additional for it. That's all that's saying. There you go. Should buyer fail to deliver the due diligence or fee or any initial earnest money deposit by their due dates, or should any check or other funds paid by buyer be dishonored for any reason by the institution upon which the payment is drawn, buyer shall have 1 banking day after written notice to deliver the cash, official bank check, wire transfer, electronic transfer to the payee. So there you go. Seller should have the right to terminate this contract upon written notice to buyer, and seller shall be entitled to recover the due diligence fee. So here's the thing. So even if they did get the due diligence fee to them and they sent it out to them and then they said, well, you know what? I'm having problems getting it to them. The seller could cancel the contract and then say, you still owe me $1,000. So once you go under contract and you agree to that due diligence, that's everything you gotta let that buyer know is that you owe that, even if you decide to cancel it. And now, at the same time, if you have the money and you're going to that seller, and right as you're handing that money to that selling agent, the buyer calls you and says, don't give him the money. I'm having second thoughts. You got to pull the money back. Also goes with the seller. If you're on the sell side and you get that phone call and they say, don't cash that check, don't give it to the sellers, you can't give it to the sellers. So until that's one of the reasons why you want to get rid of that hot potato. Get rid of that money as quick as you can so that you don't get caught in the middle of it.
Held up for a while, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've had people like agents who've gotten the money and then they were gonna go and something happened, life happened. And for some reason they forgot about it or whatever it might be. And so it was like 3 days later that they delivered the money. And in that time frame, the buyer, has changed their mind. Well, there's gonna be some upset people because the money should have been delivered. So, get rid of it. That's why I even like the idea of like this whole mailbox money thing is that, just overnight it. If you're not anywhere near or can't be anywhere near them, have the buyer overnight the money to the seller. Send it,
PayPal.
Yeah, PayPal, anything along, and just keep yourself out of the middle of it. The less you touch money, the better off you are. All right, so earnest money deposit, we talked about that. That goes to the escrow agent, which is the attorney. The money is made out to that attorney is what it comes down to, so that's where that money goes. And of course, as you can see there in F, you put the name in of who it is. So if it's like Whitaker and Hamer, just write them in, whoever it might be. And then there's a note there that basically spells it out for you again. In the event of a dispute between seller and buyer, the disposition of the earnest money deposit held in escrow, a licensed real estate broker is required by state law and escrow agent, if not a broker, to retain the earnest money deposit in the escrow agent's trust or escrow account until escrow agent has obtained a written release from the parties. And there is a form, I don't remember the number now, but there is a form that is like, canceling the contract and releasing the earnest money, or canceling the contract and not releasing the earnest money. And so that's the form they're talking about. But just because I call up and say, hey, I'm the seller and Joe Blow just canceled that contract, I need the earnest money, send it to me. They can't do that. They have to get it in writing, because sometimes there's a little bit of a squabble, right? I haven't seen it where it hasn't been paid out, because in the end, it states it in here pretty clearly that if you as the buyer breach the contract, that's what the seller gets. They get the due diligence, they get the earnest money. And it explains that on page 6 or something like that. I don't remember for sure. But that's what that note is basically saying. The parties agree that a real estate brokerage firm acting as an escrow agent may place the earnest money in an interest-bearing account. We don't have to worry about that. They can. Here again, the effective date, the date that the last one of buyer and seller has signed or initialed this offer or the final counter offer. If any and number 2, such signing or initialing is communicated to the party making the offer or counter offer, as the case may be, the parties acknowledge and agree that the initials lines at the bottom of each page of this contract are merely evidence of their having been reviewed as terms of each page. So that's what I was talking about. It's not a binding contract because they put initials on it. It's just saying they've read the page. Due diligence, there you go. Buyer's opportunity to investigate the property and the transaction completed by this contract, including but not necessarily limited to the matters described in paragraph 4 below. And then there's a due diligence fee, talks about it being negotiable and negotiated amount. If it's paid, it shall be the property of seller upon the effective date and shall be a credit to the buyer. So it's even telling you how to do that. Buyer at closing. The due diligence fee shall be non-refundable except in the event of a material breach of this contract by the seller, or if this contract is terminated under paragraph 23B. So this is why one of the things you want to do is go through this a lot of times with your buyer or even your seller so that they understand this contract. Too many times agents just like, all right, we're going to go under contract. They fill it all out. They send it to them. They tell them to sign it and initial it, and they don't explain it to them. This is why it's important to explain it to them, because if something happens later on, and then the buyer's coming back to you and going, Terry, I can't believe it. I want my money back. No, you don't get, you never told me that. Yeah, I did. Remember when you.
No, we don't read a lot of stuff nowadays.
Exactly, we just sign it. But remember when I told you, and even if you go through and highlight just some of these things and give it to them and say, just want to make sure that you understand this, and that there it is, it explains it for you. Here's due diligence. Here's what happens with it. With that fee, if the seller breaches, this is what happens if we breach. And so that, just so that you know what goes on with it. This is the only way you can get it back, is through a material breach, basically, where they have lied to us about something that they should have known about.
Right.
And it might be something with the foundation, or it might be something, it'll be something big that they tried to cover up. And a lot of times the other real estate agent will be involved. And then down there at the bottom, you do have the due diligence period. And again, you just put that down there, the period beginning of the effective date and extending through 5 p.m. on. And like I said, the average is about 21 days. I always try to get 30, because the more, again, if I'm on the buy side, I want as much due diligence period as I can. If I'm on the sell side, I want to shrink it. And so I always ask for 30, and a lot of times the sellers will come back and say, I will do 21. Like I said, that was pretty much like the average.
Okay.
All right.
And it is 3 o'clock. Don't you need to?
I do. I got a clock up there.
Oh.
I see it's 2:59. So Here's the thing I want to tell you though, is that the first time I took a contract to purchase class from our former BIC, it took her an hour and a half to go through the first page.
Oh, wow.
We try to go a little bit quicker, but that's where they're at. So we'll do this again. Look for an email, but we'll definitely finish up on the offer to purchase. And you guys got samples of it. Let's see here. Giselle, do you have your access to your North Carolina Association of Realtors?
I do.
Okay, they have the 2T and the 2G. If you go in there into their form section, you can see them in there and you can download them there.
Cool. Gotcha.
And here's the other thing too, I always like to give a sample where it says sample like this across it. I would give this to my buyer or seller. I'd give them a sample of the 2T so that they had it. And not only would I kind of just go over it, I'd go over some of the highlights of this, like the house is being sold as is, some of those other things. This is the due diligence. You know, if you as the seller breach, this is what you got to do. If you as the buyer breach, this is what you got to do. And please go through it and read the rest of it. You got any questions, give me a holler. But it's definitely good to go over the highlights. Now, Dale Suggs, I can tell you that he goes through it. He does like an hour, basically presentation to his, especially buyers. He gives them a presentation so that he doesn't have that issue with them. Okay, I know next Wednesday, I think we have another one for sure, but look for something in the email here and we'll finish this up. Thank you. Thanks for coming, Giselle.
Thank you.